Hello and welcome to episode 153 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about week one of the Major 2 qualifiers. They just completed a little less than an hour ago or half an hour ago. So we want to talk about these matches and kind of look ahead to week 2 a little bit with our predictions at the end of the show. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Getting a little bit of snow here and might lose power or internet. So if I randomly cut out or anything like that, I apologize in advance. But we're going to try and get through this as quickly and efficiently as we can. Hopefully, it doesn't come to any wild shenanigans like that.
Yeah, usually we kind of take our own time. Where some of these podcasts can go 90 minutes. Hopefully, we're at more of a brisk pace tonight. We want to get it in before Bink his power goes out. Which, I mean, I worked with him for so many years, and that was a constant issue. If there was any inclement weather, it was basically Bink is going to be without power. So let's start with the matches on Friday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. We started off with LAT and Carolina. Not a big surprise here. Of course, Carolina did have a very good result at Major 1, but LA Thieves, I think we both agree, are one of the two best teams in the world at this point, and they proved it in this match. They win 3-0. Any thoughts on this opener?
Yeah, I think that was the big thing coming in was this was a rematch of that first round matchup at the major between these two teams where Vivid literally couldn't see out of one of his eyes, or at least it looked like that. And there were two hard points in that series that were almost 50. One was a 50-point club, the other was like a 60-point club. So it was very lopsided hard points in that. And we've talked now a lot at length about Carolina's hard point struggles and even the analyst desk and commentators commenting on that since the holiday break. So that's been a consistent narrative for Carolina since their hot start, and that continued to be the case here. It was only one hard point, and it was obviously closer than their other two hard points at the major, but it was 250, 153 for LA Thieves here. Gwen dropped 38 for the L. One thing I noticed on this map one, which was Vault Hardpoint, was that Ghosty in particular was using a sub on the first hardpoint on Vault, which, I mean, if you think about it, like historically, first hardpoints or P1, as the community calls them, on a majority of maps are very inconsistent when it comes to scoring points. They're usually like battles for spawns, and if you start on the good side, you're trying to hold the good spawn for the second hill, and vice versa. If you're on the bad side, you're trying to flip it. So a small map like Vault, seeing teams like adopting to using more subs now kind of was interesting to me, and this was it seemed to be a trend throughout the Vault hardpoints that more players than usual were using an extra sub on the P1 for Vault hardpoint. I just noticed it really for the first time here with Ghosty, and Ghosty looked good with a sub, so I thought that was interesting, and that's something I'm going to continue to keep an eye on for LA Thieves as the the meta develops and whatnot throughout the year, because that's one thing that could we talk about teams constructing their lineups around like a flex player or two subs and two ARs versus having that flex who can really pull out a sub, pull out an AR, and do well with both. And like if Ghosty's able to, slide into that conversation as one of those players who's just like doing it with whatever gun he has, that only benefits him. And we've talked a lot about him before, so that was just something interesting that caught my eye in that map one. And then, we've kind of talked about the search for Carolina being like, if they're struggling in hardpoint, they got to win searches if they're going to win series. They started out by trading rounds on Hacienda Search and Destroy. It was 2-2. And then LAT just won 4 straight. And there was a 1-2v4 that Carolina choked. And then I think it was a 3v4 or something where Hydra got an ace in the last round. It was 2 winnable rounds of the 4 straight that LAT, or 2 winnable rounds for Carolina of the 4 straight that LAT ended up taking. So, lopsided in the scoreboard there, seeing a 6-2, but could have gone the other way if Carolina clutched up. So that was worth noting. And then in the Game 3, Protocol Control, LAT takes it 3-1, and highlight moment for me in that was Hydra did the meat shield on Vivid, and I'm pretty sure it had to be the first time we've seen that in a CDL broadcast, because I don't think I've actually seen it outside like scrims and 8s and stuff like that. And Hydra kept it PG. He wasn't, teabagging or shoving him into walls and stuff like we've seen in other clips. So he kept it PG and was just actually using him as a meat shield. So I thought it was funny at the end of the day. But when that's like the highlight moment of a map, that kind of, speaks for itself. Like nothing much else to write home about, just strong performance from LAT here. 3-0 overall, hot start for them coming off of the second place finish at the major, and we'll talk more about the Thieves and Carolina in a little bit.
Well, one last thing we talk about this match, it's not really related to the actual in-game stuff, but after the match, Envoy takes the time in his post-game interview to call out Gwyn specifically. And I was, pretty surprised. I know that Gwyn has had some of issues with, other players, but this seemed out of left field. Basically, Envoy said Gwyn double pause being useless on the map. That is exactly what he said. And I looked up the stats, and Gwyn had, a 1.46 in the opening hardpoint. Of course, they lost by about 100, and then the other respawn, he went 30 and 24. And he had I think 10 or 11 more kills than anybody in the series, regardless of team. So I thought it was interesting just that happened. I don't know if there's anything deeper than that, or if it's just players get really annoyed when they get killed by him and they're still winning by 100 points or something like that. I don't know.
This just isn't the first time we've heard this overall narrative. This is the first time someone has put a name to it, like Envoy actually saying Gwyn. But obviously earlier this season we had Shotzi talking about people not playing the right way and all that stuff. So we've heard it before. And I guess even before that, we heard JCap talking about Geo in particular. We're hearing this about this, I guess you can say, the new age of players, and the conversation coming from a lot of players who are veterans now, which, I mean, even in my head, it's a little weird to consider Shotzi and Envoy veterans at this point, but really at this point they are. So I feel like that's just going to be, a talking point that we hear going forward now. And it's going to be on, someone like Gwyn, if he's able to, adapt his play style to, fit what these guys are talking about, how much does that change what Carolina is able to do? And it's not like Gwyn is on a team with, no veterans. I feel like if Gwyn was really doing something super outlandish, that, Slasher just wouldn't put up with that. You know what I mean? It's not like Gwyn is on a team like Minnesota that doesn't have a veteran presence, quote unquote. And, at the end of the day, Minnesota has Looney. So that stuff wouldn't fly with him, you'd imagine, either. So it's interesting that came out. I don't think I looked earlier and I didn't think I saw a response from Gwyn on Twitter. So that's something, old school COD players, if you got called out in an interview or whatever, Twitter is going to be on fire the next day. So that's a little interesting. But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, we've seen Gwyn put up numbers in wins and in losses. I just don't know how much in particular, especially when it's not like this is the first hardpoint loss that Carolina has had against LA Thieves. They lost with him putting I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I imagine he didn't have a stellar game in 2 50-point clubs at Major 1. So it's he can put up big numbers and lose, or he can not do much and they still lose the hard point. So I think it's a bigger conversation. Carolina's hard point we're going to continue to have to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, it's definitely damned if you do, damned if you don't. If he drops a 0.7, then people are going to call him out. And if he drops a 1.4, people are going to call him out. I think Carolina has done well just by themselves, and I don't think that there needs to be drastic changes one way or the other for how Gwyn plays, unless results kind of dip and they just continue to lose. Then maybe there's a longer conversation to be had. But I think right now it's just kind of a blip. I don't think it's any more than that at this point. Next up, we have Boston and Vegas. No surprises here. Vegas does win a map. They win the control, but Boston wins 3-1. They, the hard point was relatively close. It was 250 to 199, but Vegas to this point had not won a hard point all season. So them losing isn't a surprise in the slightest. Boston wins the S&D pretty straightforward. Control, Vegas wins, and then another hard point win for Boston. 15 in a row to start for Vegas this season, which I don't know what the previous record is. I'm sure this is far surpassing it. But yeah, it is what it is. It's Vegas, and they just continue to lose. Any overall thoughts on this match, which it's kind of straightforward in the sense that Boston won and Vegas lost?
Yeah, the control was really weird to me. And even Chance and Miles were doing the broadcast, and Chance was like kind of speechless after the first round. Pretty sure it was a 6v4 in favor of Boston. So Boston was on offense, I believe, with 6 lives, Vegas on defense with 4. And Boston didn't have any ticks on the inside A zone. And I guess in theory, like thinking in hindsight, Vegas like doesn't want to push in there and lose lives and then lose the zone and have to fight with less than 4 people for the outer zone to end the round. But they literally just like gave up the entire 3 ticks on the inner zone and then played a 6v4 for the outer zone. It was really weird. And then it's even more weird when you factor in that they just come back from down 0-2 after that round, which, a 6v4 on defense isn't a guaranteed win, but, maybe if they do push in there, they get a couple, a 2-piece or something like that. Maybe they're able to make some magic happen. But regardless, they somehow come back after that round 1 that was just interesting and win pretty straight to win a control. There was some graphic on the broadcast too about Boston's control. I don't think Boston, or maybe it was who was Boston's. I think in the next match we'll talk about for Boston, which is against Gentlemates. I don't remember which way it was, but I believe one of them was like 11th in control stats, and the other was like 12th in whatever stats they showed in the graphic for control. So like Boston hasn't been good at control this year, and I guess that's like just indicative here of Vegas coming back from down 0-2 to take 3 rounds in a row and get their second respawn win of the season. But yeah, other than that, not much to really talk about here. But Boston takes care of business, and the hard points against a team that hasn't won a hard point yet.
Yeah, and maybe the biggest thing is that Boston, with this win, got their 6th victory of the CDL season, which ties their total for last season, which is amazing. I think it's it's indicative of their turnaround. And obviously, we'll talk about them in a little bit with their second match. But it's pretty crazy that they've had this kind of turnaround the way that they did, and with this roster, which wasn't very hyped up or wasn't thought to be much, coming into this season. Last match of Friday was the most surprising result probably of the weekend. Maybe second, we'll get to that. But Atlanta loses their first match in several weeks to the Vancouver Surge, who are obviously making their debut with Neptune in the roster. So, we don't really know exactly what Vancouver is going to be like heading into this week. And they turn out to be a very good team, at least in this small sample size that we have. And Atlanta, they lose their first match. They were on a 12 match win streak if you're including the minor as well. So they started off really poorly, and then they went on that gigantic run. Obviously, they win the first major, and then the first match of the Major 2 qualifiers, they lose. I think we should probably just loop in Vancouver's second match. We'll obviously talk about it a little bit more later on in the show, but I think we have to talk about just Vancouver in general. The fact that they went 2-0, they beat Atlanta in this first match. Does this change your perception of the Surge at this point? Obviously, it's only 2 matches, but coming in, I think both of us had them pretty low in our power rankings. We thought they were closer to the bottom of the CDL than the top. Now they literally beat the best team, and then they beat a team that I think, we're kind of hot and cold on as well with Cloud9. Did this change your perception of Vancouver after, making this roster change?
I don't know if like it was like a full-on change of heart for me, really, but it definitely was an eye-opening win against Atlanta for me. Neptune played well in both series this weekend, which is just we talked about the roster change for Hicksy and his stats and his statistically struggling and respawns, all that yada yada. You add in somebody who's getting kills and a positive KD with an SMG and respawns, and this is the result. That's and it's what a lot of the people in the community are going to say. And you can value the glue guys or the route men or however you want to phrase it. And at the end of the day, if you're getting more kills than the other team, you're putting yourself in a very good position to win maps. Obviously, there's some cases where that's not the case, and teams that get outslayed and or the team that does outslay loses. But end of the day, you're gonna probably more times than not find yourself winning if you're dropping more kills, and I feel like that's what we saw here. But really, in this Atlanta series, at least, Nasty just absolutely went off and was playing very well. So I think it's it's early, 2 match sample size for this team, and we've every single roster change over the last decade plus in competitive Call of Duty is always talked about like a honeymoon phase for a new team just coming in. And we even had it, I think, back to the MW2 LAG team we talked about a couple episodes ago, or maybe it was last episode, where like they literally made a 3-person change, bringing in Joe Deceives, who else? Joe Deceives, Assault, and someone else I can't think of off the top of my head with RCs, but and they replaced Neptune and Huke, and we were talking about that. Like they came out and they fried for a couple of the online matches at the start when they were first a roster, and then they really just didn't do much the rest of the year. So it's a fine line between getting super amped up over a team that's winning its initial matches, as opposed to a team that is winning matches like this and continues to build on it. So I am excited for this Vancouver team. Like, this is obviously what they set out to do by making a roster change. I've spoken highly of Rambo and just his mind for Call of Duty and everything in the past too. So I think he has, the right mindset to like not let this team just like get complacent with this. They're going to put in more work, I feel like, and continue to try and improve and build on this 2-0 week. But obviously very good early returns on the roster change. And I was thinking too, like, this is really outside of the Vegas Falcons changes, the only 2 roster changes of challengers players that we've really had so far are Hook going into OpTic and then Neptune going into Surge, and both of those players were playing very well in challengers. They come up, and again, this is a small sample size for Neptune, a little bit longer for Hook, but still a small sample size for both. But they were frying in challengers. They come up into the pro league and they continue to play very well. So that's kind of like something to keep an eye on. If players are playing well in challengers, there's a chance they're gonna continue to do well, even if they're called up to the CDL and playing, the best of the best. So, maybe this, if Vancouver does continue to play well with this new lineup, maybe it'll be the catalyst for more of these top challengers players to get another chance in the pro league.
Yeah, and Exceed was that third player that you were talking
Yes.
about for LAG and MW2. And I think something that we talked about last week with Vancouver in this roster change, and we've talked about for other roster changes in the CDL, is you have to start usually against a bad team to kind of get your feet under you. They were thrown into the fire. They played Atlanta in the first match, and they win, and they go 2-0 this week. So, even if things kind of fall, I don't want to say fall apart, but they kind of diminish a little bit, and you're not as great of a team as you initially think, you got those 2 wins, which are very important, and these are going to be some of the tougher matchups, or at least this Atlanta matchup is going to be one of your tougher matches in these major 2 qualifiers. So getting off to a hot start, and even if things start to go to the wayside, at least you have these matches and some of these points that are going to matter quite a bit later on in the qualifiers. Saturday, February 15th, we started off with Boston and LAG. I think we talked about it a little bit when we predicted this match. LAG has not had the start to the season that they have certainly hoped, or many people maybe expected. They've been one of the worst teams in the CDO actually, and obviously Boston has had this incredible start, something that really no one expected, at least to this extent. And Boston ends up winning this series actually. They win 3-2, which is kind of the Breach's MO. It's pretty rare when they don't go to a game 5 like they did with Vegas. But they win 3-2. Pretty exciting series, at least the hard point. And then, I'm obviously a big Breach believer, and for them to go 2-0 to start the Major 2 qualifiers, which was a concern that after Major 1, that they would kind of, they kind of regress to the mean a little bit after such a hot start, but they're on to another pretty good start in the Major 2 qualifiers. What did you think of LAG versus Boston?
Yeah, interesting series, considering what we've talked about previously with Boston. And in their series against Vegas, they win both hard points. Obviously, that's a team against Vegas that hasn't won a hard point all year. But in this series, they play against Gentlemates, and they lose both hard points. They pull off the wins in the 2 searches and the control, which they lost the control to Vegas. So it's a Neslo for Boston, and it's just, it's like a trying to make sense of what it is. And I think it's just, no major disrespect to Vegas, but you just can't put much stock into their hardpoint play until they start winning multiple hardpoints. I would say, even if they were to win one hardpoint at this point, I wouldn't put a ton of stock in, other teams' hardpoint against Vegas, just because it's not consistent at that point. I don't know. It's just tough to really gauge both teams' plays when one team is struggling so tremendously in that mode. But it is, interesting that Gentlemates lose both searches just based on the players they have on this team. You would think search would be something that they could excel in. I mean, obviously when they had Hydra and D-Real and Sender, they were very well practiced in search. I think back to some of the invasion wall bangs they had. Was that last year now? Yeah, it was last year. Gee, I get my maps and stuff mixed up in my head. The pre-nades and the wall bang spots and everything, they were pretty well practiced in search for, a majority of the tenure when they were the New York subliners. You'd think the players would carry that over to some extent here. And, Skies has been a really clutch S&D player throughout his career as well. So it's interesting to me that they dropped 2 S&Ds here to a team like Boston, but, like you said, Game 5 been a little bit of a different story for Boston this year as opposed to losing them consistently last season. And at this point now, Maven said on the broadcast, Gentlemates are 0-5 in Map 5 this season. So maybe Gentlemates are taking Boston's mantle of consistently losing Game 5s from last year.
Yeah, I just looked it up. Boston, I believe, is 5-3 in Game 5s so far this season, which means all but 3 of their matches have gone to Game 5. So they have a ton of experience in this. So they didn't go to Game 5 against Vegas or Atlanta both times, and then I think they also beat Carolina in 4 games in one of the qualifiers for Major 1. So it's literally all but 4 matches have gone to Game 5. But I don't know what to think about LAG at this point. I feel like a change is coming. If it continues, there has to be a change. It can't just stay the same, and maybe they look to some player that is very good in S&D. I think we mentioned Illy on the last podcast or 2 podcasts ago. Maybe that is something that happens, or just another player in general that can help boost them in S&D and at least kind of stay the same in the respawns, because they would be in a lot better position if they could just win one S&D a series like that. Really or just occasionally win a Game 5. Just going 0-5 is such a drag, and that's actually what we saw from Boston last season. A big reason why they were so bad was they lost all of those Game 5s, and they would get to them. They could even win S&Ds on occasion, but they just couldn't finish out series, and that really hurts you and hurts the momentum of your team. And LAG really needs to fix it, or find some kind of solution in some way to get out of that hole that they've dug themselves into. Miami versus Minnesota was the next match. Minnesota wins 3-1. We'll talk about this is kind of like the appetizer to the entree for Minnesota fans, I'm sure, this week at least. But Miami, they played without Meadows for this series. They played with Super instead. Meadows was out for health reasons. Didn't stop the Heretics from winning the opening hardpoint. They win 250 to 248, nearly win the S&D as well, and then it kind of turns in Minnesota's favor. They win this 3-1. Any lasting thoughts? Obviously, it's kind of different or difficult to decipher what happened in this series with Miami not playing with their actual roster, but I mean, this is a great week for Minnesota and a great win in particular for Minnesota. Just, they've had this start to the season I don't think a lot of people really expected, especially recently they've started to put it all together. What did you think of this match?
Yeah, definitely, going to be interesting for Miami's sake to see what's going on with Metals. Beyond this match, how long he's going to be out, or if this was just a one-match thing for them. Obviously, hoping him the best. If health concerns or whatever this situation is with him. Super, all things considered, for being like a last-minute substitute, and I'm pretty sure I saw on Twitter, like maybe it was during Major 1 or right after Major 1, like he just recently turned 18 and was being outed and picked up by some NA Challengers teams and doing the Challengers thing of like bouncing between a couple of rosters. I believe I saw that. So obviously he's a newer player, and I thought he held his own in the map 1 and map 2 in particular. But really, I mean, map 1, 250, 248 was just an absolute wild ending. Real went Super Saiyan mode, as we've talked about before. And that's what it took to get the job done there. And it was a 6-5 in the search. Like I said, I'm pretty sure Super was holding his own in that one. If I'm able to pull up the score here, I can definitely tell I'm on the Super went 12-7 in the map 2. So I knew he played pretty well, especially his first search in the CDL against a team like Minnesota's had a lot of reps in search this year, a lot of game 5s, a lot of search is with this squad. So new squad from Miami, Super getting thrown in, having to adjust the play calls and the strats and all that on the fly. Him dropping 12 kills, that's pretty impressive in my book. So shout out Super for that. But yeah, after that, he struggled a little bit in the control, and didn't have the best map in map 4, but it was just 25 and 29, so nothing terrible there. Like downright atrocious or anything. It's just this kind of makes a little more sense when you think about it. Like last minute sub comes in, playing against a team that went game 5, round 11 with at the major, and Minnesota almost pulled off a full sale in the game 5 against them at the major. Makes sense. Minnesota's able to get this done, all things considered. Kind of sucks from, a Miami fan perspective and just like a competitive COD fan perspective that we didn't get the full run back of this match that, like I said, almost came down to a full sale, came down to a game 5, round 11 at LAN. Would have been great to see both squads fighting back, a shot at revenge for Minnesota against the full Miami team, but obviously that's not what we get here. So we'll have to see what's going on with Metals, how long Super is going to be in the mix. But I definitely, I'm glad I looked and saw it. He went 12-7 in the search. So shout out Super for doing his thing in the search in particular. On short notice, filling in his CDL debut. We'll have to keep an eye on the Miami situation roster wise. But big win for Minnesota to kick things off, and it's not their biggest win of the weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I think I don't know what Super was saying on Twitter. I know that you said like he said he turned 18, which he does say plus 18. I can finally compete. That was on January 30th. COD Gamepedia has him at age 24, and he's competed in like challengers for the last few years. So I don't know what the deal with that is. But I mean I don't blame you or anything. I would definitely think that as well. But yeah, I think he has a chance to start for a while if Meadows is out, and obviously I think this is the reason that they have him there is just to, if there are, and obviously they dealt with some things with Real last year with his visa, and they changed some of their roster. So there's a reason that Miami is one of the only teams that has, extra players on their roster, and this is kind of the, it's a good thing, and hopefully they can figure things out if Meadows is out and Super has to come in for a while, but it's going to be weird.
No, I just went to Super's Twitter, January 30th. He tweeted, +18, I can finally compete.
Yeah, I know. But then if you look at his COD Gamepedia, he's 24 and has challenger results for like since 2020 or 2019.
I don't know.
So I don't know. Maybe there are two supers and they're getting mixed up on Gamepedia. I do not know. So I don't know. It does say that I feel like super. There's multiple players with super. Okay. Well, that doesn't help me because they don't link it. But okay, I don't think this needs to turn into a super podcast. But either way, congrats to him, and maybe he'll get a longer chance at this. Next up, we had I think it was Breaking Point tried to call this El Clasico. They need to cut that shit out. That is not right at all. This does not have a rivalry name as far as I can remember. I know that we tried to think if we had talked about it before, but as far as I know, there doesn't have one. Either way, this was not a rivalry game in the sense of the result. Atlanta just beat them up. Especially after FaZe lost their first match of the weekend to Vancouver, I thought possibly FaZe is going to take a step back. It's going to be a weird series. It wasn't. I mean, I guess it was if you're just looking at FaZe and kind of the dichotomy between the two results, but they dominated. They win the first hardpoint by 80. They win the S&D. They sweep the control. It's a 3-0 sweep for FaZe, and I don't know if FaZe is really the top headline anymore because of what happened earlier today with OpTic's second match of the weekend. I don't know if you want to get into that, but it feels like credit to FaZe, but what is going on with OpTic seems like the more prevalent question now that we saw what happened with OpTic versus Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, all things considered, not like looking ahead before we get to the match that just happened today. Seeing this Atlanta versus OpTic match after Vancouver Surge beat Atlanta, I was thinking in my head, like, okay, like, OpTic's got a chance here if, they've been doing their thing in practice and getting prepared, all that, yada, yada. And all things considered, map one was pretty close. 250 to 171 is a little deceiving in my mind. Dashy picked up a huge 3-4 piece. Like, OpTic got 3 down. It was literally Dashy versus 3 guys on the left side of the map. If they push up, and get Draza and then keep pushing up to get the spawns for P4. They spawn FaZe out, and then OpTic's in the hill, and that like completely changes the game. So Draza picked up literally the game-winning 3 or 4 piece to keep the spawns and allow FaZe to close it out. So the score it's an 80-point win, but it could have been a lot closer, and it was pretty close up to that point as well. And even weirder thing about that map one was it was, a 250, 171 where Abizi was like 12 and 24 and Dashy was like 16 and 30 or 16 and 31, something like that. So it was almost like a 3v3 map because both of them struggled in the map one. But end of the day, that they, Atlanta was able to close it out and thanks to Draza's massive 4-piece there. And then the search was pretty close to another Vault S&D, 6-4. We've seen a lot of Vault S&D, especially with Atlanta in their matchups with Atlanta's matchups with LA Thieves. And it's just all, it's a pretty aggressive S&D map. Teams just trying to get in that vault, the lower bomb site, and just trying to, hit things out as a squad. But the protocol control was just absolute dominance from Atlanta. I did want to know protocol changed the B control zone from the low grass area where you can see it from the underground bomb site in the S&D to up to P2 on that like little staircase area where there's like the tower or whatever. So will be interesting to see if that zone change has any major impact on protocol control for the rest of the season. If teams are picking it more, if they think it's a little more balanced, or if they're avoiding it more just because they don't like the new zone, etc. So going to be worth keeping an eye on that going forward. But yeah, overall, strong win for Atlanta. Obviously, it's Pred's first match back for the team, but Dashy and Kenny really struggled in this one with 0.6 KDs overall for the series. I saw, I'll talk about it after when we're talking about OpTic's next match. Easy Mac had a tweet today. It was kind of like, wow, that's kind of surprising. But the bigger thing, I believe, Atlanta FaZe tweeted now, Draza is 8-1 versus OpTic. I think this has to be only with Atlanta FaZe, though.
Yeah.
Just based on the matches they have listed here. That's still, the whole like joke of Draza saying he's the CEO of OpTic. Like with each win, it gets like it moves a little bit further from a joke and be like, oh, this guy actually just beats OpTic every single time. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, end of the day, impressive bounce back win for Atlanta, all things considered, following the loss to Surge. We'll talk more about OpTic in a bit.
Yeah, I was actually looking up the record before we had those internet issues. So OpTic had beat FaZe 5 straight times. Basically in 2023, they beat them, I think, all 5 times that they played them. And then Draza obviously joins after the 23 season, and they go 8-1, or they have been 8-1 against OpTic. FaZe has since Draza's arrival. The only loss that they have was at Major 3, and that was a 3-2 loss, and that eliminated FaZe from that tournament. But since then, they've won. This is only their second time playing them since then. So, it's kind of weird that we hadn't seen this matchup yet, this season at least, between FaZe and OpTic. But yeah, FaZe 8-1 with Draza against OpTic, which is pretty crazy to think about, especially after how hot OpTic was against Atlanta for, at least a full year, which was, I mean, that was pretty crazy too, because FaZe had OpTic's number before that, and now it feels like it's solidly back in Atlanta's favor. Next up on the matches, we had C9 versus Toronto. Just a really weird result. I was talking about it when you disconnected earlier, that I just don't know what to really think about these results and what to think about these teams, as part of that. And this is a big one because Toronto, we kind of consider them to be in that, not in the top echelon, but, we thought about them as like the second tier, maybe third tier, definitely in that top 5 or 6. And to lose to Cloud9, who have been very inconsistent and proved to be kind of inconsistent this weekend as well, it just pretty surprising. I don't know what you think. Obviously, you're a big Kleenex guy. He had a really bad series, at least to his standards. And now Toronto starts off on the wrong foot in the Major 2 qualifiers.
Yeah. Looking at it statistically here, 42 and 62 from Kleenex for a 0.68 KD. I obviously don't have the numbers to back it up, but I would be very surprised if there was a worse series from Kleenex since joining the CDL. I will say, as that like super fast, aggressive SMG that he's been in past years, he is known to have a lot of interactions, and there are a lot of maps I can think of where he's like 35 and 40, and like the next closest guy is like 30 and 30 or something like that. Like he's got like 15 extra interactions, and it's just happens to be like 5 of those are kills and 10 of those are deaths. But regardless of the specifics, it was a pretty lackluster performance from Kleenex here. But I do want to say, Mac played absolutely out of his mind first 2 maps in particular of the series. Attach went 10-1 in the search too. I think Kremp played pretty well in the control, if I remember correctly. But a big caveat that I'm going to put, like, I don't want to say like I'm putting an asterisk on this match or anything, but just has to be noted since it's been a talking point for us on this podcast whenever we're talking about Cloud9. And I didn't feel like I saw a lot of talk of the community talking about it, but I happen to be watching the OpTic podcast, or sorry, the Scump watch party for this match, because I put it on for the OpTic versus Atlanta match because I wanted to see what they were saying about the new team and stuff like that. And Method said on the watch party that he got a text, and at first he was like, I'm not going to say who sent it, and then he eventually said it was Awakening. So not sure if it's actually Awakening, but he seemed like, to say it was Awakening that told him. But he was saying that the match was being played on the Dallas server when we know Cloud9 is in Los Angeles and Toronto is competing from Toronto. And Methods and Scump speculated that would mean if they were on the Dallas server, they were probably on 50 to 60-ish ping. And Methods said, I'm pretty sure he was reading this from the text from Big Wake. If not, it was said in some regard, but it said might be the fakest online game for these two teams. So that has to be factored in. And, again, I support Kleenex, and I think very highly of him. If there was some server ping stuff going on in this match where he's dropping a 0.6 KD, that would make a lot more sense to me. He's not that type of player where you expect a performance like that out of him. And I don't want to discredit C9, especially if both teams are playing on like 50, 60 ping. It's obviously not ideal, but both teams have to deal with it. It just obviously, in this instance, this was a case where I don't want to say it benefited Cloud9, but Cloud9 were able to get the win despite the circumstances where earlier in the season they were having those server issues and they were on the other end of it. Like they were getting stomped by OpTic and LA Thieves in those online matches. So again, this is unfortunately just something we're going to have to continue to see when we have these teams competing. It seems like it's really a thing with Cloud9 playing from Cali, but end of the day, I think that explains a little bit more. It putting that context of a potential massive server ping discrepancy, not even a discrepancy if both of them are on 50 or 60 ping. Like if they're on the same ping, it is what it is, but that's just, something they got to deal with. But knowing that, like if I wasn't watching the Scump watch party, I would have been sitting here like I have no idea what the hell was going on with Toronto. I don't understand why Kleenex was doing as poorly as he was, yada yada. So that makes a little bit more sense to me. But I don't want to totally discredit Cloud9 because this is just something they've had to deal with and seemingly all of their online matches this year. So they get a win here, but if we see these two teams face off on LAN, who knows? I mean, I think both of these teams are, teams that you would expect to be better on LAN with the players they have, but also they were two teams that didn't necessarily have the best performances at Major One. So it's a weird situation all around. But end of the day, just a interesting match ended up going Cloud9's way.
Yeah, just another C9 weird match. Just online qualifiers, just not their thing in general. Whether it's them winning and kind of being discredited for that, not saying you, but just in general, there will be people that do that, or losing and then people blaming the internet on that. Like, I mean, you can't win with that. Sunday, February 16th, though, we had LAT versus Vegas to start off. I don't really know what there is to say. I guess the fact that Vegas won Search, like that's cool, I guess, but they lose the series 3-1. The hard points were, they were wide, like 125 points in the second hard point, 100 and whatever that is, like 112, 113 point win. The first hard point, 3-0 control. So the respawns, just not Vegas's thing.
I think the Vegas winning the Search here is, it's not a major red flag. We've talked about how Search should be like if Vegas is going to have a mode that they're good at, like coming into the season, it was expected it would be Search just because that's more of what we heard the Saudi Arabian community played versus playing the respawns and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure somebody said before the season started that the Saudi player had never played Control before they started playing in challengers and stuff. So regardless, I just think with Atlanta, I'm mixing up my team names tonight, with LA Thieves coming off the Major 2 performance where they were losing Search and Destroys to Atlanta, I felt like playing, we've talked about the whole not taking or not scrimming Vegas debate, or not taking Vegas seriously debate, all that. Like if you want to try and work on different maps and stuff against Vegas, I think that's a good opportunity for a lot of these teams to do it, especially a team like LA Thieves that you expect to be at the top. But this was Skyline Search was a map that that was the game 7 in the grand finals, and it was pretty close between Atlanta and LA Thieves, all things considered, because it went down to around 11. So to see it go to around 11 between those two teams, but be a 6-1 against Vegas, that's a little bit of an eyebrow raiser to me. The Whom went 10-1, but it definitely felt like even I Hold Shift and Study were commentating this match, and they were basically, Study in particular was the one who was like, yeah, it felt like LA Thieves were kind of just trolling here. And there was one round they literally like 3 or 4 hit the underground part of the map on Skyline, which you just don't see teams do. And it felt like LA Thieves, like they stomped them in the hard point map 1, and they were just like, yeah, we can do whatever we want in this search and get away with it. But Vegas was a little more disciplined and took advantage of that. So I don't know how much you need to take away from the Vegas search win over LA Thieves, but I definitely think it is interesting that it happened in the fashion it did, especially, like I said, when we saw LA Thieves go to around 11 against Atlanta. And, no disrespect to Vegas when I say this, it's not disrespectful to anybody, but Atlanta is definitely a better search and destroy team than Vegas Falcons. And if, it's a closer match between Thieves and Atlanta than Thieves versus Falcons, that raises an eyebrow to me. So, other than that, this continued the trend of losing hard points, which you would expect for Vegas, but they are now 0-17 on the season. So I'm gonna try and I feel like the community is gonna do a good job of keeping track, but I'm gonna continue to try and keep track of how many hard points in a row they lose, because that is starting to pile up.
Yeah, for sure. Shout out to Luis in the YouTube chat for tuning in. Yeah, I don't know. Like, they're just Vegas. It's like, I think, I don't know what the easiest game mode is to win. Obviously, it's not hardpoint. Like, I just think hardpoint, like, they're just so outclassed in terms of slaying power and talent. Like, that's going to be really hard to make up. Like, where it's a lot more free flowing than S&D and Control, where you're kind of forced. Control, like, it's a set place. Like, you can kind of have something there. S&D, obviously, it's, I don't know, like, you just get different timings. It's just, I mean, obviously they've won 6 maps so far this season, so it's not like they have like a game mode right now where they're like, man, we're really good at that. But hardpoint, I just feel like the way it's set up, it's going to be really hard for that team, especially without Kicks, who we've talked about is like their best player, the best slayer on their team. Like, without him, it's going to be even more difficult to win those maps, and especially like win them consistently. I don't even know if that is a possible like a possibility for that team, but I guess we'll see. Carolina versus Toronto was up next. Obviously, a pretty needed win for both of these teams, considering how the weekend started. Carolina, they lost to LAT. We just talked about how Toronto lost to C9 in their first match, so either way, one of these teams was going to finish 0-2 this weekend, which I don't know if we were necessarily expecting, maybe more so with Carolina, considering how tough their schedule was. But the Ultra, they end up winning this series 3-1. They, I don't know if there was like a real, like a trend I saw here. Obviously, Carolina's biggest thing, and it's something we've talked about over the past few podcasts, and it kind of took a break during Major 1, but the hard point has not been great. Something that you said that Nameless brought up initially was how it seemed like they were kind of trailing, and things were not going as planned in hard point anymore, and that was during the Major 1 qualifiers. Obviously, they had a very good Major 1 result, so I think maybe some of that was overlooked, or we thought, and I think we even brought it up about how Carolina had like their S&D had changed pretty drastically, if I'm not mistaken. And obviously we weren't real sure what to make of everything with Vivid and his eye situation at Major 1. But they went 0-3 in hardpoint this week. They go 0-2 in the matches. What do you think about the state of Carolina and in Toronto? I should say, getting back on track with a win after a pretty bad week, opening loss to C9.
Yeah, so that was really the big thing for me here was, seeing how close this series was, all things considered. It put a little bit more weight in the whole server situation for the Cloud9 versus Toronto match. Like, I think Carolina has been a pretty good team and definitely a better team than Cloud9 online and at the LAN that we've had this year. So it makes if Cloud9 just blows Toronto out in the fashion that they did, and then Toronto is playing very competitively and beating Carolina, it makes me put a little bit more, stock in believing that there's some server stuff potentially going on in that first match. But nonetheless, yeah, the big talking point is the hard point here. Toronto wins both hard points, and Carolina goes 0-3 in the mode this week. So that's going to be something we have to continue to keep an eye on. And I feel like if it continues, using, I talked about it at the start of the show when we were talking about Vancouver, uh, you know, and I mentioned Hook too. Hook comes up from challengers into OpTic. OpTic had a pretty good hard point record before the major, at least. Neptune comes in and immediately adds some slaying power for Vancouver. So maybe a move for a top challengers player is a potential answer for Carolina if they need to fix things in the respawns and particularly hard points. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. It is worth mentioning too in the round 11 search and destroy here between Toronto and Carolina on red card. It was down to a 2v2, and then the match just went it just showed draw on the screen, and Slasher's jaw dropped. He was like, what's going on? And it was funny because I lost internet and I texted you, and it was right at the start of the round 11, and I have notifications on for the CDL Twitter, so I was looking at my phone because I had 5G, but I didn't have Wi-Fi, and I'm going to get a notification for who won the round 11, and I didn't get it for a couple minutes. I'm like, what's going on? So then when I was able to catch back up, I saw they had a disconnect and a pause or whatever the situation was there for the round 11. And after that restart for the round 11, Toronto kind of just I think it went to a 3v1 maybe in Toronto's favor, and then I think Slasher got one kill. If it was Slasher last live, whoever was last live for Carolina, I believe, was in a 1v4, got one kill, and then Toronto closed out. So it wasn't the 2v2 state that it was in before the restart. So that's unfortunate for Carolina. If it goes their way, they win the control. We're potentially looking at a game 5, even if they lose the map for a hard point. But can't live in a world of ifs. So just got to deal with whatever the case may be here. We'll have to keep an eye on Carolina's hard points, but this is a little bit more indicative of the performance I expect from Toronto.
Yeah, and DCs have been such a prevalent part about this season as is. Yeah. So it's kind of like something you just have to expect going into each of these matches that there's probably going to be one.
I feel like all things considered, obviously you don't want a DC to happen ever, let alone in round 11. But I feel like both teams can live with it a little more since it was a 2v2. It's not like it was like a 1v4 for Carolina. And then, or I'm saying 1 left on Toronto, 4 left on Carolina. Then the DC happened. And then they're like, oh, we got totally screwed. All things considered, when it comes to DCs, that's probably the most fair thing. The one thing I will note, and it definitely bit Carolina a little bit, is because of the restart, nobody had trophy systems for the round 11. So nades were a factor, and I'm pretty sure Toronto got, they threw a double frag in and got a nade kill in that B bomb site on red card. So that's something that, we've talked about, the pause feature or whatever in Call of Duty, numerous times over the years, how that needs to be enacted for score streaks and whatnot. Like the Hellstorm score streak wasn't even able to be used this weekend, according to the watch party. There's some bug that if you called in the Hellstorm, it just crashed the game, which that's par for the course when it comes to Call of Duty. But not especially if you're a team that's like super into search strategy, you could make the case to be like, okay, if we lose this round, like talking about the 5-4 round, the round before the round 11, like maybe they have two trophy systems and they only use one in the first round because they're like, okay, we got to have one in case we lose round 11. I don't know if that's actually like a conversation these teams would have, but like it, let's just say for the sake that is, they save that trophy system, potentially lose that round to go to a round 11, then they go to a round 11 where there's the DC and they lose that trophy system anyway. Like that's where there needs to be some like pause or restart tool or whatever it is to try and fix these DCs and get it back to the state there was the situation at the major where there was like three DCs in the control, and then the refs didn't. I think it was Minnesota and Cloud9 maybe, where like Minnesota should have been on defense for a round 5 in the control, but they didn't want to restart the game for like a fourth time, so then Minnesota just had to play offense even though they had more ticks and would have earned defense if the game like actually played out the way it would without the DCs. So long story short, I think long-winded rant there from me, but if there's a long list of things that competitive Call of Duty fans want fixed in the product, and one of them would be some sort of like restart tool or pause tool to fix instances like this to make them less damaging potentially.
Yeah, we've only asked for it for like 10 years basically, so it's coming. At some point it'll come. Next up we have Vancouver versus Cloud9, and something that we talked about earlier in the episode. Vancouver, they went 2-0 this week. They traded maps basically with Cloud9 this entire series. Map 1 goes to Vancouver, map 2 to C9, back and forth, and Vancouver closes it out with a 6-1 win on Protocol S&D to go 2-0 this week. Obviously starting 2-0 with this new lineup or this iteration of the lineup. Cloud9, they dropped to 1-1, which would have been nice for them to get 2 online wins to start off the qualifiers. Not how it ended up being though. And another Game 5 loss for Cloud9, and something that we've kind of noticed at the bottom of the standings or near the bottom of the standings a lot of times with C9 and LAG in particular. These teams are just losing Game 5s left and right, and it's adding up and kind of keeping them back and at the bottom of the standings. Vegas, not so much. They're not getting to a lot of Game 5s, but C9 now, 1-1 to start the qualifiers. I guess it's better than the other scenario where they go 0-2, which was not something that was out of the realm of possibility, I guess. Any thoughts on Vancouver and Cloud9's Game 5 series?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. You just reminded me when you were talking there. Brian Stats1 on Twitter tweeted that Cloud9 have not won 2 straight matches yet this season. They've only won one and then lost immediately after that. So they're 4-9 overall on the season, counting the major and minor. Shout out Brian Stats for that. That's interesting. Just like that's just the caliber of players on Cloud9. You expect, obviously we've talked about the online situation, and they had a tougher schedule at the start there, like playing OpTic and LA Thieves back to back. But it's just you expect eventually like there's going to be 2 favorable matchups that go their way, and it just hasn't happened yet for them. So something to keep an eye on there. But overall in the series, yeah, Cloud9's 5th map 5 loss of the season, and I believe earlier it would have been Boston. Yeah, LAG Gentlemates are 0-5 in map 5 now, they said on the broadcast. So that's 2 teams with 5 map 5 losses already early in the season. That's kind of interesting as well. But yeah, this series in my eyes was a little bit more like I said earlier. I thought Neptune played well in both series, but the first series against Atlanta, really, that was mostly Nasty. Neptune still played well in that first series, but Nasty just was like on another level in that one in particular. In this one, Neptune played really well. 110 kills, 110 and 99 for a 1.11 KD. 04 had the highest KD actually, probably helped. He went 11-3 in in the game 5, but Neptune he went 38 and 32 in the control that Surge won, and then he was 33 and 24 for the loss in the game 4 hard point. So um, that's what I was kind of, just thinking. Like, I wanted to say that, Neptune has been playing well and adding another level of slaying to Vancouver's respawns, which was lacking with Hixie in the lineup. Um, Not the best way to phrase it in my eyes, just because like he played well in that game 4 and they still lost. Again, very early days for this new roster, but positive early signs. I still need to see more. Want to see how they build on this 2-0 week. It's obviously a strong start. It's the best start you can really have. And I'm excited to see, especially we got a taste in the Atlanta series of like Nasty playing in a new level with this new squad, and then we see Neptune stepping up really in both series, and those are like the two guys for the surge that we were really talking about coming into the season were Abuza and O4, just because they're the guys, the rookies being held over from the previous year. So if the two guys we weren't really talking about coming into the season are stepping up, elevating their play, and then Abuza and O4 are, I don't even need to say picking it up, but because O4 played really well in this series too. But like if they start to be that focal point and the other guys are if things start gelling for this team and everybody is playing better, then you just expect better results for the team. And I think it's got to be an exciting time to be a Vancouver Surge fan, and if you are a Vancouver Surge fan, but again, very early, so I'm hesitant to fully say Vancouver Surge is winning champs, but it's got to be a little bit just like an injection of hope and positivity for a camp that it was struggling a little bit to start the year.
Yeah, we can't get too far ahead with the Vancouver hype, but like you said, it's kind of an injection of hype, and they were a team that seemed very stale and like they couldn't really have a ton of upward mobility. Basically, like the ceiling seemed pretty low, at least at the end of Major 1, and now it seems higher than that, which is just a positive development. I don't think we really need to read too far into that. Like, obviously they have some work to do. They're going to have to continue to win matches, and C9 of course is not the best team in the world. Atlanta is, but Atlanta also just is kind of like up and down a little bit at the beginning of the qualifiers. So maybe this is just them kind of getting into a groove. I'm not entirely sure of what excuse I can make for FaZe's performance against Vancouver, but either way, the Surge are 2-0, and now they're in a very good position to get into the winners bracket of the Major 2, and I think that is something that could really help them in terms of getting a few extra points as we get further on into the season. That's really all that matters at the end of the day. But yeah, like Jordan Belt said, this was when we were talking about Carolina Lunars for Vivid question mark. I mean, I have no idea about Lunars, so I don't think either one of us have like a good read on him as a player. Obviously, there is quite a bit of hype, and
Yes.
people think highly of him, so maybe that is a solution. I'm not entirely sure if Carolina makes that change yet. It could be something that happens like in the middle of these qualifiers or after the minor, excuse me, because Carolina can't afford to just like. They can afford to wait a little bit. They're not in the same position as like someone like LAG, for example, but they're also a team that is trying to compete for like those top 5 spots basically. And if they, I guess, struggle in the Major 2 qualifiers, I think it would be worth looking at whether replacing Vivid is the right idea. We talked about it before the season, how this team was filled with question marks, and Vivid was probably the biggest question mark in general, because you could talk yourself into Slasher, right? Because he's a former world champion. He didn't really get a great shot at it last season. TJ has been in the CDL for multiple years now consecutively, so we kind of know what we're getting in it. He's actually been better than we've seen in the past. But Vivid had kind of been off and on teams. It just didn't seem like it was working out for him over the past few years. So he was probably the biggest question mark, and I just don't think it's worked out nearly as, even with the record being what it is for Carolina, and it's very impressive for what they've been able to accomplish. he has not been very good. And maybe he hasn't been put in the right position, or maybe it's just time for the team to move on. I think they'll give it a little bit more time because they just had a very successful major one. But I do think that he will be the first guy out, so to speak, when they make that roster change, or if they make that roster change when they feel like they need to.
I agree. I do think if they make a move, there's just that pre-existing chemistry with TJ and Gwen from last season, as well as Slasher and TJ dating back to AW and even their Rise team in World War II. So I think Vivid would be the odd man out if they decided to make a change. I do think just like the name Lunars has been a hot topic in Challengers. They've been playing well. It fits that formula of, like I was saying, that the two guys from Challengers who've come up this year, Hook and Neptune, have both fried in Challengers, come up to the Pro League and carried it over. My only thing is I just don't know enough about Lunars and his play style to know how it would mesh with Slasher from an AR perspective, because if Lunars is like one of those like slower main AR players, then that would kind of like potentially mess up the pace unless Slasher was willing to move to a flex and third AR on some, or a third sub on some of these maps. But if Lunars is playing that sort of like flex third sub role in Challengers while Fellow is the main AR, then that seems like it could, from a role perspective, be a strong fit. I decided to replace Vivid. But that was the thing with Vivid coming into the season, was like this whole trying to switch from an aggressive sub player to an AR. Like, how is that going to work out? And I feel like he's had some moments. I think you even said, I was surprised when we were talking about the Carolina major breakdown, like he played better at the LAN than he did in the online qualifiers, I believe, statistically, which I was kind of like surprised, just because he literally almost couldn't see out of one eye at the major. But all things considered, I just think with Carolina, if the hard point struggles continue, they are going to have to look to make a move. And I feel like if they do look to make a move, Vivid, replacing Vivid with somebody who can consistently add more slaying to the team in the hard points and help in their hard point, would be the move. Because even if that player that they eventually, whether it's Lunars or not, even if they aren't a really strong S&D player right now, you put them on a team with players like TJ and Slasher, who are really strong S&D players in their own right. They can kind of teach them and show them what they need to do and help them improve in search. So with hardpoint being a possible concern for Carolina, I think that's the route they would potentially look to go with any roster moves if they do make a move.
Yeah. And, it's not saying that they will. They have a bit of time, and like I said, they have the luxury where it's not as dire as a situation with some of those other teams that are at the bottom of the standings, that the longer they wait, they basically are eliminating their chances at being at champs, which is the ultimate goal at the end of the season, if they wait. But Carolina has the luxury to wait a little bit and see if things turn around, or if they could just get results even with Vivid maybe not statistically being that great of a player. Shout out to Christopher Mendez. He's also in the YouTube chat. Appreciate you coming around again. And then we have the grand finale of the weekend. I was like, why would OpTic Minnesota be the last match? I think the reason why you would want OpTic to be the last match in general is, it's OpTic. So like that's something. But, against Minnesota, I wasn't entirely sold on this matchup, and it turned out to be a one of the most entertaining matches just from a narratives perspective. Minnesota wins this 3-0. That was not expected whatsoever. We both picked OpTic to win this series. And not only is this a 3-0, but combined with OpTic's earlier loss to Atlanta, that makes OpTic Texas 0-6 in map count and 0-2 in their matches to start the Major 2 qualifiers. That is shocking, to say the least. Of course, these are the first two matches with Pred back in the lineup, so maybe better with Hook, ? But there's certainly going to be some kind of there has to be some kind of improvement here, because of course losing to Atlanta is not like the end of the world, so to speak, and I wouldn't say that losing to Minnesota is the end of the world, but in conjunction with each other, them happening just a few days apart, and those being the first two matches with Pred in the lineup, it does feel like there will be what the hell, like a feeling of what the hell is going on with OpTic. Are you concerned about OpTic? What is, I guess, your panic meter? Where is it at this point in time with OpTic Texas?
I don't think I'm overly concerned at this point. I think we've talked a lot on the podcast about the green wall, the whole you ain't first or last mentality, and all that. And right now, a lot of people are, calling for Kenny to be dropped and all that stuff. I think that's a little premature. And even Maven said it's kind of ridiculous on the podcast. Maven was pretty funny today. He was like, he was on for nameless on the desk and instead of commentating, and he was like ruthless. Like he said something about Vegas. I wanted to put in the notes and I forgot what it was, but he was just being blunt and honest. Like he's at that point in his career. He turned 40, I think, on Friday. So happy 40th to Maven. But I think he's at that point in his career where he just doesn't give a shit anymore. He's saying whatever he is on his mind. And that's I just think right now, like Kenny, especially these last two series, didn't play particularly well. If you had Dashy struggled in the first series against Atlanta too. They both had pretty low KDs. Like if you have anybody playing and at dropping 0.6 KDs for a series, even if it's only a 3-map series, it's going to be tough to win. So I think, we both think highly of Kenny as a player and, historically in the competitive COD scene. That's just, not what you expect from him. So if he's able to, get back to the level that we expect him to be at on a consistent basis and what we've seen historically from him in his career, I think OpTic will be all right once they continue to get more reps in with Pred and get more practice, all that good stuff. There were 2 listen-ins. That was one thing I was looking at for OpTic, just to hear the communications, and nothing really sounded off to me in either of them. It was map 1 for both of their series this weekend. It seemed like the comms were natural in both of them. I feel like OpTic, just like at that point of the listen-in, they were both times where OpTic started to, make a little bit of a push in the hard points and have a hold and string some kills together. So I thought it was a good time to like gauge it, as opposed to it would have been interesting if one of the listen-ins was like they were severely down and getting fried, and then you're hearing like any like I don't want to say disagreements because that's not, but just like players being upset or disgruntled just because of the state of the map or getting fried consecutive lives, whatever the case may be. But long story short, I think I talked about wanting to hear the comms. There was nothing really to write home about in the comms either way for me. I thought it seemed like, just picking up where they were before. The whole Pred situation happened earlier this year. Will be interesting to see if Karma or JP post anything like Karma on Twitter or JP on YouTube posting any comms or just like gameplay breakdowns or anything like that to further dive into what happened to OpTic this weekend. But really, I think this match in particular was just Nero played pretty well in all the maps. He had the highest, Easy Mac tweeted, for a 3-map series. He had the most kills, I believe, this year. And I mean, he had 90 kills in this series. I don't know how many other 3-map. That's an average of 30 kills a map, and you're obviously not getting 30 kills in a search and destroy. So it's like you factor 10 in, 10 for a search. That's 40 kills for the respawns each, right? So Paul X was behind him. Paul X played really well in the map 3 in particular at 40 and 30, and he had 70 in this series. And on the other hand, Kenny and Dashy in that series against Atlanta. Kenny had 36 kills in the 3-map series, and Dashy was right behind him at 37, which are the lowest so far this year, according to Easy Mac. So I think that's just, especially for the Atlanta series, that, is what I was kind of saying. Like you got 2 of your main AR players struggling to drop kills. It's going to be tough to win. And in this Minnesota series, you're playing against 2 guys dropping the most kills in a 3-map series. It's going to be tough to beat that when they're slaying like that, right? So the control was definitely winnable for OpTic. They had a 2-0 lead, and Minnesota wins 3 in a row. So that's something to keep an eye on for them. It felt like, OpTic could have taken the control. Maybe they win the following hard point. So anything can happen in Game 5 with Minnesota. We've seen it multiple times this year. I was watching the Scump Watch Party for this series, and they were kind of all just speechless for this. They really didn't have anything to say. It was just like, what the hell? Like they were just, for lack of a better term, they were speechless and didn't have much to say after it all went down. But yeah, I think well, we'll have to see what's going on with OpTic in this upcoming week. But obviously, O2 isn't where they wanted to be. This, like you said, the loss to Minnesota stings a little bit more than the loss to Atlanta. I feel like, just because, all things considered, new roster playing the defending champs, that's always going to be a tough matchup. But Minnesota, I said it on last episode, like I wanted to pick Minnesota for this just because they're talking about OpTic being 0-2. I didn't expect it, but I could see Minnesota causing an upset because they've played a lot of top teams very close this year, and so I think this is more indicative of Minnesota's potential than like major issues with OpTic right now. Although obviously an 0-6 map count week for OpTic is the worst possible outcome they could have, but I don't want to take anything away from Minnesota. A hard fought win for them, and I've kind of gassed Minnesota up a little bit recently, probably more than other people have. So I think it's a big win for that camp, and it will be interesting to see how they build on that, because if they fall back into their routine now after this win of dropping a couple Game 5s, then that's like kind of just going to be their reputation, right? Like they're like that team that can beat top teams, but they can also just lose to them too at the same time. Which that wasn't a great analogy there, but that's a little inconsistent, I guess you can say. They have that potential to cause an upset, but not consistently. I don't know. I'm babbling at this point, but yeah, tough loss, tough week for OpTic. We'll have to see, hit the drawing board and what they come back with in week 2, the Major 2 qualifiers.
Yeah, with OpTic, I would say that it's hard to panic about them at any point in time, because we've seen them just have these ridiculously bad losing streaks and then they go on and win champs. That's kind of the thing I expect with OpTic now. Like I don't think you can really know exactly what to expect, what you're going to get from OpTic in any single match or any single tournament. They're just kind of unpredictable in that way. Good. I mean, it's a good thing because for them, or for us, it's very entertaining because you don't know what you're going to get. For them, I'm sure it's frustrating to go into a week and not even win a single map. I don't think that's exactly how they expected this to go, especially with Pred back in. But it's hard to say they should panic or that they should, worry too much about all of this. Of course, they need to improve, but that was the case with Hook if he was still in the lineup, and it's still the case with Pred. They are. They're a weird team in general, but they're probably going to be a very good team by the end of these qualifiers and probably one of the favorites to win Major 2, I would imagine. I did, you were talking about how they didn't seem super frustrated in their comms with each other, but something that I don't remember if we talked about this, but after the FaZe loss earlier in the weekend, Dashy took the webcam off of his monitor. And I would say kind of discreetly. It wasn't like one of those just like he took the webcam and then he took it to the side where you really couldn't see exactly what he was doing, but he was breaking the webcam. He was like twisting it to snap it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I would, it's obviously a frustrating loss. I like you said, losing to Minnesota is probably a little more frustrating. Losing to Minnesota, just because Minnesota's not as good of a team. Atlanta's a very good team, but in terms of like the actual meaning, playing FaZe is such a big deal for OpTic, I would imagine, because they've been one of those championship rivals, so to speak, for the last few years. So losing to them probably hurt quite a bit anyway, but I thought that was pretty funny that Dashy did it. And he did it just, I think, discreetly, so it wouldn't seem super obvious to the rest of the viewers that like what he was doing. But the fact that he just took it off of his monitor was like a good idea of like what's about to happen. And but that's how it goes. It's happened a lot of times before. I don't know if I would imagine the CDL hands those webcams out to the teams And I could not imagine how many times they have to replace it, or they're like, yeah, like this, it's broken. I've seen some of the players just throw them off of their monitors, or just like pull them down, and I don't know, like that's just, I can't imagine having a webcam just shoved in your face, or just staring right at you as you've been like embarrassed, or you feel embarrassed, or you just feel frustrated after a loss. But yeah, we'll see what happens with OpTic if they're able to bounce back, and like you said, if Minnesota can keep this up and kind of build on the momentum and the hype that they have going on right now. But yeah, that about does it. We're like an hour and a half in technically. I don't know, after we edit this show and some of the delays and the pauses and whatever, we'll see if it's as long. But we appreciate you guys sticking around. Of course, it's been a weird show with the internet, so we apologize if there are any audio issues or if there are any weird gaps. If we're repeating things that you're like, they just said that a minute ago, it's all because of the internet. I've had some internet issues, Bink's having internet issues or power issues, and it's causing internet issues. So we appreciate you sticking around regardless. Just to wrap up, Pick'em so far this season. So you went 6-5, I went 5-6. Obviously, this was a hard week to predict with how many upsets and weird results there were. But you're now 52-30 on the season. I'm 47-35, so a 5-match difference. Make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music. Like I said, our YouTube, and I've said this on pretty much every episode for the last few weeks, but the goal is to get to 300 subscribers by the end of the CDL season. So we have a few months now, but we're at like 207 or 208. And we really appreciate you guys tuning in and watching those videos. Please like the videos, comment if you would like. But we just appreciate the support we've gotten on that over the past few months. You can also follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast tours at Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. That's JBINKK. We're closing in on 40 days, I believe, consecutively streaming. So please go and follow Bink over there. And yeah, we'll be back on Wednesday for our live show. Like I said, I think on the last episode, because I'm back to work, it's the schedule is going to be weird, so it might be a very late night podcast. So if you're a fan of that, please tune in. You can either watch it live on YouTube or Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. But it'll be, we expect it'll be at some point Wednesday night that we'll do the podcast. And then obviously the episode will be uploaded to YouTube and all of your podcast feeds on Thursday morning. But yeah, that about does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the support as usual. Like Preston said, thanks for sticking with us through the internet issues. We were kind of joking before the show went live that we had a stretch last year during the season or during the off season. The days blend together for me at this point, but we had a stretch where either I was having internet issues or Preston was having internet issues for a solid like 3 or 4 episodes in a row, and we had a good streak up until today. So like he said, sorry if there's any interruptions or whatnot. Thanks for bearing with us, and shout out the guys in the YouTube chat who showed up today. Obviously, Preston already mentioned you guys, but Luis, Jordan Mellison, Christopher Mendez, shout out you guys. So yeah, it was an interesting weekend of matches, all things considered. Teams like Vancouver and Minnesota sitting at 2-0. OpTic at 0-2, setting up more narratives for the rest of these online qualifiers to come up. It's going to be a little bit of time, especially with the minor in between the qualifiers too, before we're actually on land. So we got some time to see these squads in action in these online matches, and we got to bear with it, and we'll be here to break it all down for you along the way. So hope you guys tune in and appreciate all the support. Like we said, we'll see you back here hopefully Wednesday night at some point. And yeah, other than that, remember to send the chow.